I'm no good at taking good advice, and I'm self-careless, so don't tell me twice that lately I've been so stuck in my head that I forget just about everything my therapist said. Maybe I'm self-helpless. Maybe I'm self-helpless. Maybe I'm self-helpless. Maybe we are all self-helpless.
Hey everyone, welcome to Self-Helpless. I'm Delanie Fischer, and today I'm joined by Jennifer Kempin, who is the founder and director of Fáilte Microschool. And Jen is sharing about homeschooling her son after he experienced some bullying in conventional school and all of the anxiety that comes along with that, of course. And when she witnessed the positive impact that homeschooling had on her son and his mental health, emotional well-being, and overall joy for learning, she decided she wanted to help other kids who were struggling in school as well. And that's how her micro school evolved. So Jen offers a really interesting perspective because she's not only a mom who is homeschooling her own son as well as other kids, but she was a teacher for over a decade. So she's giving us a lot of interesting information, having the experience of, teaching in both a conventional school setting and an unconventional one. And I've shared a bit on the podcast before. So some of you may already know that I did independent study in high school, which is kind of like homeschooling, but I didn't have a teacher in person with me. My teacher was not my parent. I had some teachers online and everything was online when I did it. And I just loved it. And it provided me and my parents with an alternative that I really needed at that time because I was dealing with a lot of health issues at 15, different digestive issues, and doctors weren't really sure what was going on with me. So I couldn't be in a typical school setting, even if I wanted to be, but because I just felt really sick every day. So doing independent study helped me stay on top of my coursework and allowed me time to heal. And, once I got better, I just wanted to stay doing the homeschool thing because I really enjoyed it so much. So I'm really passionate about this topic because of my personal experience as well. Learning and education is often presented as this one size fits all thing, or that there's something wrong with you if you don't fit into that mold for whatever reason. But that's just not the reality. We are all so different. And I'm really glad that this movement is taking off because I just hope it helps a lot of people the way it's helped me, the way it's helping Jen's son and all the kids at her school as well. So perhaps there are parents tuning in right now who notice that their kid is struggling at school for whatever reason it may be, and you just don't know what to do. I'm really hoping this episode gives you some ideas for alternatives that you might be able to look into in your area, or just reminds you that you're not alone in what you're going through. So, Jen and I talk about how she found out her kid was experiencing bullying at school, what signs parents can look out for, especially if the kid isn't sharing what's going on, the impact her micro school has made on the kids who enroll there, how she sets up her day at her school, the curriculum, the schedule of free time, all of that, and really how it differs from other school settings, the impact it's made in her life and her career. And she gives a ton of resources for people who are either curious about getting their kid into a setting like this, or for parents or teachers and people who might be interested in opening up their own micro school. Also, if you have been a client of mine, you may recognize Jen because she worked for me for a while as my operations manager, and we've been friends ever since. So yes, if you're thinking, is that the same Jen? It sure is, and she's absolutely crushing it. Super proud of her. All right, everyone. So here is my chat with Jennifer Kempin. What led you to wanting to homeschool slash micro school your kid? Whatever kind of background you can give us around the situation, maybe age, grade, what things led to this decision.
Yeah, so it was never part of the plan. I was not somebody who was going to any kind of alternative school, anything, my kid. I was a
Mhm.
public school teacher through and through. My plan going into college was I was going to like revolutionize the public school system from the inside out, right? That was the plan.
Mm.
And then I taught for 10 years and it wasn't really happening. Like nothing, no major revolutions were happening. And so I was feeling burnt out as a teacher. I had a baby and I wasn't really able to balance being a mom and being the teacher I wanted to be. It was just really not working. And
Mm,
so I stepped away from teaching, and that's when you and I met. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do, what career I was going to follow.
yeah.
Um, but then my son went into kindergarten, and he was just really sensitive, and I could just tell that sending him to a large, busy, regular public school kindergarten wasn't going to work. And so we decided to keep him in. He was at a small private school for pre-K, and so we kept him in that school for kindergarten. And he was being bullied in kindergarten, which was the craziest thing. And
Oh,
I didn't know what to do. It was the end of kindergarten. I didn't know what to do. Tried to work with the school, didn't really work out. He's We did our best. He started first grade. It still wasn't really working. It wasn't They weren't working with us. They weren't helping us, and they started telling us that he had all these disabilities and these issues, that he couldn't handle school, that he was behind in reading, he couldn't handle lessons, he had these inappropriate behaviors, and I was just not seeing any of that at home. It was only happening at school.
wow.
And having been a special ed teacher for 10 years, I was like, I just don't that's not how a disability works. It doesn't just show up in one place and then nowhere else. That's not how it works. And so I started looking into getting him into other schools, other private schools, thinking, okay, this poor kid has been traumatized by this bully and by the adults not supporting him. Let's just get him in somewhere else and start over, and he'll be better. And unfortunately, when I tried to get him into other schools, he was traumatized by school. So we would walk onto the campuses, and immediately those like difficult behaviors would show up, and they would say, "Oh no, we don't want this kid in our school." And so my sweet, fantastic kid, who is fabulous in every other setting, was getting rejected from these little tiny private schools, and I was shocked. Being a public school teacher, I just thought like the grass is greener at private schools, and if you just threw money at a problem, then you could solve anything. And that
Mm,
wasn't the case. And so that was when I decided to homeschool him, but only as a short-term fix until he was better enough to send him to back to a school, or until I found the right environment. I wasn't going to do it for very long. I think you and I had even talked during that
yeah.
time, and I told you, I was like, "Oh, I'm only going to do it for a week or maybe 2 weeks. Okay, maybe a month. Okay, fine, maybe 2
Right.
months."
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so was he telling you that he was unhappy at school, or did you start to see signs that he was acting differently, or was he outright saying it?
It was a lot of things. So in the beginning, it was just like that love of learning, that like joy, that spark in his eye started to dim. You know, that joy that little kids have, and they just like can't wait to show you what they did today at school, or this really cool rock they found. Like all
Yeah.
that stuff that just started to dim, which was the scariest thing, because that's what you love about childhood. And so that was the first thing. Then he started to not eat as much, and he started to not sleep as much, which for him, those
Wow.
are his like kind of telltale signs. Other children, just being a professional who's been in this area for a long time, other
Mhm.
children might have other things. So if you know your child starts to like hit and scream a lot when something stressful is happening, if they start to hit and scream every time they come home from school, you should pay attention to that. For my son, it's that he stops eating when he's stressed, and
Mm,
he stops sleeping when he's stressed, right? We knew that about him when we saw stressful things happening.
yeah.
And so that was the other thing. Then eventually he started talking about it. But that's how he's always been. It's like, especially when he was younger. Now he can talk about things. He's much older. It's been a few years. But back then when he was young, we're talking about like 5 years old, the
Right.
words came much later, like months later, not right away. Um, and then when the words came, they were like disjointed, like, this kid did this today and I didn't like it. And then I would try to get more of the story, but I couldn't get the full story. So I couldn't really tell
Mhm.
so you can't tell as a parent, was it really bad? And I would ask the teacher, and she would say, "Oh, no, that didn't happen." And so I'm like, okay, well, did it happen or didn't, So
Right.
it was just really hard. But I would say, as a parent, when I look back, I work really hard to not like make myself feel guilty for it, right? Because it happened the way it happened. But I
Right.
do wish I had trusted my mom since
Mm-hmm.
earlier, because I knew something was wrong a lot faster, and I wish I had just taken steps faster. I did right away go to the school, but the school kept telling me, no, nothing's happening. At the end, after a year of dealing with this stuff, they finally asked, did you do all this stuff to my son? Yeah, I did all that.
Oh my
And I was
gosh.
like, "Did you never ask him?" And they were like, "No, we had never asked him." And I was like, "What do you mean?
What?
All this time you've been telling me that he isn't doing it." They're only 5 and 6. The 5 and 6-year-olds, even when they lie, they don't lie very well. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right,
And I'm like,
right.
"You never asked him? Like, you never even talked to his parents, and here they have been telling me that they were dealing with it, they were having meetings about it." And I'm like, so I thought a lot more was happening than was happening. So all of it was happening, all the things that my son was telling me, and I was trusting the school a lot more than I should have. And
Mm.
so there's that balance of like, do you be a really skeptical person or do you be a trusting person? I don't know. So those were the signs in the beginning, were his like stress signals.
Are you able to speak to kind of what kind of bullying was experienced?
I think our situation was a really rare situation. So
Okay.
he was in kindergarten. I don't think it usually happens in kindergarten. So his was manipulation, which is what I think made it really hard for the teachers. So
Uh-huh.
in that sense, I will give them somewhat of a break in that I don't think it was clear cut for them to be able to see it happening.
Right.
Um, I did call their attention to it many times, so in that sense, and they didn't listen to me, so in that sense, I do think they were at fault. I don't know that this happens very often, and I can't talk to it, but
Mhm.
what I would say, I would recommend if you hear certain things to look out for, a child not letting your child have other friends. He was 5, and this kid didn't want my son to have any other friends. That was really hard because they don't have a lot of words at 5. Like, they don't have a lot of understanding of things.
Yeah.
So, it was really hard. That would be really hard even at, like, 13,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
let alone 5. I don't I At any age, that's hard to explain to a kid, but that's a big red flag. It took me a while to get that that was bullying, but it is, to not let a kid have other friends. Eventually, the child was telling other children not to talk to my son. That went on for a week, but we didn't know until way after it happened. Then it turned into other things like hitting him and stuff like that. But
Wow.
it started with it started with not wanting him to have other friends. So that would be, and that can happen at any age. So I guess that would be the thing I would say to look out for. I mean, even in my school now with older elementary school kids, I've been surprised is that picture books really make a huge difference. Kids really respond to picture books. And
Mhm.
so I thought, having 7, 8, 9-year olds, I thought that picture books would be like really dumb and stupid and who cares? But they really get a lot out of them. So when they were fighting a lot and arguing a lot and disagreeing a lot, I found some books about like the squirrels who squabbled, and it's about the squirrels that argue over this nut, and it's actually pretty funny. I did find ones that were like appropriate for them, right? So they're kind of funny.
Mhm.
And they loved the book, right? So anyway, I'm saying this because I did find a book called The Not So Friendly Friend. So I think that helped. We still do have the book. I just don't remember exactly what it was in that book, but I do remember that book helped. Just having it, I think them seeing it in another kid helps them, like, to be able
Yeah.
to kind of conceptualize it.
Right.
So the hard thing is as a parent is that, especially when it's a friend situation, if you tell them like, don't I kept telling him not to be friends with this kid, but he liked this kid so much it didn't matter what I said, he wouldn't stop being friends with this kid. And he was only 5 and 6 at the time. That's true all the way through. I mean, if my parents told me not to get my nose pierced, and I got my nose pierced the next day, like, so it doesn't matter what your parents say, like,
Right.
but like having a picture book doesn't work for nose piercings, but like having a picture book for these kinds of things at in the elementary age level can help because they can kind of see it play out on somebody else.
Right. Right.
So
From your perspective, and also his now, taking him out of that environment in the beginning to a new school, what was going on?
really, it's like he developed these like coping mechanisms for dealing with the stressful situation. And so it wasn't just the bullying, right? So it started to spill over into his general situations, into like the lessons and into his group dynamics and how he was with other kids. And so as soon as he got around other kids, he kind of put on this suit of armor that he had, because that's what his coping mechanisms had taught him how to do so that he could keep himself safe. And so that's what he did. And this is what I explain to parents, like when their kids start at my current school, the parents can get really frustrated and be like, this place is so safe. Why does my kid act, terrible in the first month? And I'm like, because
Mhm.
they're like still assuming that this is going to be bad and scary, right? And
Right.
so that's the same with my son. When he went into those new school situations, he was assuming that they were going to be just as bad as before. And, being somebody who's worked with 1,000 kids at this point, I knew that that's what was happening. And I would tell them ahead of time. I would say, look, he's been bullied. He's had adults that he can't trust. He just needs a little bit of time. And they would say to me, like, oh, we understand, we understand. And then he would get into the interview and not be, super sweet and open. He'd be a little closed off. And they would say, oh, he doesn't seem really interested in being here. So we can't accept him. And I'd be like, and I would,
Mhm.
I was shocked. Like, can you give him some time? And they would say, no, we really only have kids here that want to be here. And I just was really surprised because all he needed was some time and some love and some care. And all I kept thinking to myself, like, what do other parents do? I was working from home. I was working for you from home.
Yeah.
And so I could have him at home and be with me during the day. What do other parents do that don't have that or don't have the expertise to know that this is going to get better? Like, I didn't believe the adults when they would tell me,
Right.
like, oh, there's something wrong with your kid. I was like, no, he just needs some love and some time to heal. What do other people do? I guess they start medicating their kid. It just shocked me that these professionals wouldn't take a little time to help a kid who was hurting and just needed some space.
Time to experience and trust that this was a new, better situation for him.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so you mentioned that, in the beginning you thought, this is just going to be for a couple weeks, couple months tops. How did it turn into actually we're going to keep doing this? And then not only are you going to help your son, but then you started welcoming other kids who are, maybe experiencing something similar into your micro school. How did that all evolve?
Yeah, so I ended up homeschooling him alone for a year. So every week that went by, I watched him, like, that little light start to come back in his eye. I watched him play a little more, be happy a little more. Um those like stress responses that we were talking about,
Yeah.
um they were so extreme. Like, I would start to work on writing sentences with him and he would panic if he made a mistake, like full
Wow.
on panic if he made a mistake. And I was like, whoa, this is gonna take some time to unravel this one. Like, okay, it's okay that you made a mistake. And you'd be like, no, I have to fix it. I have to fix it. Like, it can't be wrong. It can't be wrong. And then I'm like, no, it can be wrong. Like, leave it wrong. And you'd be like, no, I can't do it. And it took everything I had, like all the expertise I had, all the like all my mental wherewithal to not like lose my mind over like trying to help this poor kid. But I saw such huge leaps and bounds in progress with him that like he was sleeping, he was eating, we would go to the playground and he started to play with other kids again. And so I was
Mm.
like, okay, this is working. And I could also see we had a long way to go on certain things. And so I said, all right, I just got to keep doing this. He got into baseball. He started playing baseball on a team. He got into Boy Scouts. And so, like, my initial concerns and the thing you hear all the time about homeschooling is how will they be socialized, right?
Right.
Like, really quickly, that went out the window. I was like, he's got plenty of activities he's doing.
Right.
He joined on Wednesdays. He started going to this like outdoor education program, and he started making friends there, and he started doing well there, and he didn't have to be with me on Wednesdays. And so, little by little, I started to see him get better, and I just started to become a believer in homeschooling, which I
Mm.
never was before. because I just never knew anybody that homeschooled. I just thought it was like something they did in the Little House on the Prairie. And so,
Totally.
yeah, kids learn really fast when you do homeschooling because you're just like with them and they only need like an hour of instruction a day and they learn just as much as they would have in 8 hours. I was like, why the heck do
Yeah.
we even send our kids to school if you could just do it in an hour and then they could go play? And then I started to realize like how developmentally inappropriate it is to force a 5-year-old to learn how to read when they don't need to be reading. They should be like playing in the dirt. Like, I just started to
Mm.
like get back to what I as a teacher love about teaching. So it like nourished something in me as much as it nourished something in him.
Yeah.
And so, meanwhile, my contract and my work with you ended, and the other contracts I had started to end at the same time.
Yeah.
And I was feeling like filled up and like healed as a teacher, like, and kind of back to what I knew was right for kids for the first time in 10 plus years. And
Mm.
he was starting to like be himself again for the first time in 2 years. And I was like, wait a second, do people homeschool other people's kids? Like, could
Mm.
I do this for other people?
Right.
And I started to research it and I was, well, I had started doing that before my contracts ended. It had started to become like a side little obsession of mine. I think I mentioned
Yeah.
it to you a few times. I was like, oh, this would be kind of cool, but I'll
As
never do
soon as
it.
you told me, I was like, "Oh, this would be perfect for you.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
This is definitely gonna be your next endeavor." I was
Yeah.
so stoked for you. And as somebody who, was homeschooled myself in high
Yes.
school, well, I guess it was more independent study. My teacher was online and all of that. I was so passionate about it, and I had wished that, wow, I wish that was an option for more people because 'cause I've benefited from it so much. I think learning that what I was homeschooled at 15 because of so many health issues I was experiencing,
Mm.
that it taught me that there's more than one way to do something. And
Mhm.
that is a lesson I'm so grateful to have because I look at situations as not this or that, but there's always a third option at least or multiple options to get to kind of where you want to be. And I think it's just made me
Yeah.
a more open-minded person. I think it's made me a better consultant in professional settings and all of that, to know that there's a creative solution to something. So when I heard you talk about this, I was super excited for lots of reasons, and it's amazing to see what you've done. But anyway, continue.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I just like, it was just kind of on one of those things that was always nagging at the back of my brain. And I was constantly researching. I love to research. So I was listening to podcasts about people who were opening these. Once I found out that people did do this thing called like homeschooling other people's children, and
Yeah.
it was called microschools or hybrid schools or learning pods. It has a million different names and people make
Yeah.
up a new name all the time. And that's part of the beauty of it. You just kind of make it up as you go along and there's no right or wrong way to do it.
Mm.
And not only are people doing it, but they're doing it with like wild success. And there's a demand for it that people have wait lists and they're doing it across the country in every kind of environment that you can imagine. I mean, there's a micro school that's on sailboats. They do it
Oh,
entirely by sailing.
oh my
There's one
gosh.
there's one that I love. I see them at every conference I go to that's in Florida that's all about surfing and skateboarding. And they learn all the science and all that kind of stuff around surfing and skateboarding. I mean, it's so cool,
Wow.
you know?
Yeah.
And so you can do it and there's religious ones and then there's plenty of them that are secular. There's ones about everything you can imagine. And there's ones that are forest schools and there's one that's in a school bus itself. Like the things turn into desks and then they turn back into seats so that they can go to their next field trip, right? So
So cool.
people,
Wow.
as many ideas as you can have can be a micro school. And that's what's so amazing about it. But that's how children are too. Every child is so different. And so anyway, I just was so inspired by people's ideas and then also just watching my son. And so then we got to the point where all of my contracts ended at the same time. And we hit a year of homeschooling. And it was a terrible, like, business wise, it was a terrible time to make this decision. I just all of a sudden decided it was the week of Thanksgiving. I was like,
Yeah.
I either do this now or I go find I was an operations manager for online businesses because I had no contracts and I had no contracts coming up. And I was like, I either do this now or I go look for operations contracts. And I knew that if I went and looked for more operations contracts, I wouldn't do it. Like this, it was now or never. Because when else do all the contracts, they never end all at the same time because you
Yeah, it
try
was
not to make that
eerie
happen.
that the timing was so eerie for you, I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it was. And so I decided I was going to open 2 spots, so it'd be 3 kids in my house, and that I would focus on kids who have had, like, school trauma like my son, like, kids who just don't fit in the school structure the way that it is now, the traditional school structure.
Yeah.
And I kind of put together what that would look like, what our curriculum would be. I redid my whole basement, which is above ground. It's an above ground basement. And from being my like office to being a schoolroom.
Yeah.
And I think by the end of the week, so it was like the beginning of the week of Thanksgiving. By the end of the week, I started advertising and or no, by the first week of December, I started advertising. And by the first week of January, I had all the spots full. So within a month, I had it
Amazing.
full. And
Amazing.
yeah, and it's not just like, it's also that it's never been heard of here. Like, we don't, so there's some states like Florida is one and Arizona is another one. So there's some states that really support micro schools. And then there's other states that is really unheard of. And Pennsylvania is where I am. And that's the state where we don't really have them. And so not only like was my school new, but it's really not heard of here. And so these parents are really taking a huge risk, but they're so desperate for something, just like I was,
Right.
that they are willing to take that much of a risk.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I filled those spots and then I added another spot eventually. So I had 4 kids and yeah, we've been running full ever since then at 4 kids. It'll be a year in January, and then this week I am interviewing people and about to hire somebody.
Yay!
Whatever. Yeah, I know, really exciting. And then we've
So
got a few
exciting.
kids in the wings, so that once I hire that person, we can bring on a few more kids because there's
Wow.
a real need for it.
Once you saw that transformation in your son, I would imagine it would be hard to keep that to yourself when you thought about the other kids and
Yep.
parents out there struggling in similar situations and knowing
Yep.
that there's a solution and nothing is wrong with the kid or the parent. It's just
Mhm.
not everybody is a fit for the status quo. In fact, I would assume most people aren't, but we are
Right.
trained to just do it and get over it and all that stuff. Um,
Yeah.
Question for you around some of the logistics. If parents are wanting to look into this, whether it's they want to homeschool their own child, if that's a possibility, or look into local micro schools themselves. When you want to open up something like this, do you have to have the kind of background that you have where you're like certified teacher and all this stuff,
Mhm.
or can anybody open up a micro school? How does that work?
So anyone can open up a micro school. That's what's so
Okay.
amazing about it. And same with homeschooling your children. Anyone can homeschool their children.
Yeah.
Um, there's different laws in different states. So in Pennsylvania, to be able to homeschool your children, I believe you have to have a high school degree or diploma or a GED. But other than that, you can homeschool your children. Um, and then to open a micro school, yeah, you don't have to have any particular background. I do recommend my personal recommendation is that you have homeschooled your own children for a little while because
Mm,
it just gives you the ability to if you haven't been a teacher before, I
yeah.
would recommend you homeschool your children for a little while because then you can get a better idea of different curriculum because curriculum can sound really good on paper or when you look at it on Instagram or whatever. But then when you're actually doing it in person, it can feel very different. So I think homeschooling your own children, even if it's for 6 months or a year, gives you an idea of what you're getting yourself into. Um, and then also with starting a micro school, there's conferences for people. This is a huge movement, especially since COVID. It started with the learning pods. And then it's really taken off. Well, it didn't start there. There were micro schools before that, but the movement really started with the learning pods.
Yeah.
So I've met a lot of micro school owners, and what I've learned from that is that the ones that I think struggle the most are the ones who come out the gate like, just running, and they start with like they buy a huge property and they build all these like little buildings, and they're like, okay, I'm going to open 10 classrooms and blah
Oh
blah
my
blah blah.
gosh. Wow.
Like, and this is
Yeah.
what you and I talked about. And me as an operations manager, I was just like this to begin with.
Yeah.
The way I started my school is what I would recommend for everybody. Start with like
You gotta test it
3
out.
kids. Yeah, you
Yeah.
gotta test it out.
I can't imagine from going zero to 100 without that experience. That's
And people do, and then those are the ones that financially, like, they can struggle and burn out and fail, and that's so unfortunate because they were so passionate, and maybe they would have really been a fantastic school if they had just started small. So that would be my
right.
big plug for micro school owners. But man,
Right.
it's so cool now. And like when I started, there weren't, and I only started a year ago, but even since then, there's now all these like accelerator programs that will help you start. I mean, there's so many really cool things out there
Yeah.
for micro school owners. So it's really cool.
Absolutely. And I'm sure some parents are tuning in thinking, oh, that sounds great, but I'd be nervous to leave my kid with a stranger, especially if anybody can do it or it's not regulated. But maybe it goes also back to that kind of parental instinct that you were talking about too, is like, that could be the case anywhere at any school of,
Hmm.
is this a situation that's good for my kid or not? And just using that
Hmm.
discretion and choosing the situation that is best for you. I think you have such a really cool, unique experience of the fact that you've been a teacher in multiple settings and you're also a parent. Like that is a super
Yeah.
cool thing. And I'm sure everybody can bring their unique skill set and experience, to this if it's something that they want to do. Now, for the parents who are tuning in, I have spoken about you to several of my friends, thinking it's, oh gosh, how cool is this, and that this is an option now, because I didn't know that there was a huge movement around it, and
Yeah.
it makes sense that COVID, and I'm sure just even safety issues in school, people are
Yeah.
thinking,
Huge.
what's the alternative, right?
Yeah.
And one of my friends was like, gosh, that sounds really amazing. I'm also just thinking, I don't know if I can afford that, right? What about for the parents that maybe it's not in their budget to put their kids in something like this? Have you discovered any other happy mediums out there that isn't kind of a this or that situation?
Yeah, so it's actually really one of the things that's really cool about the micro school movement. So, depending on the school, and depending on the state. So, one of the reasons why Florida and Arizona have so many micro schools is that um, they have different versions of an ESA program, which is a state like tax program where parents can take their tax dollars with them to whatever education program they want.
Oh,
So that
wow.
money can go to the micro school. And so
Wow.
they essentially could get a micro school for free. Now that those aren't the only states that have it. They're just the ones that tend to be the ones I hear about the most. And I don't know all the details. And when this comes out, who knows? Things could change. But if things are moving very quickly in that direction, more and more states are adopting that. Some states it's like scholarship tax programs. Some states it's like there's all kinds of things. So first look into what your state government programs are and what your tax programs are, because
Yeah.
just because it's not a public or private option doesn't mean that there isn't a program that is available. Pennsylvania, we don't have that right now. Doesn't mean in a year we won't, but right now we don't. So that's the first thing. The second thing is a lot of the micro schools that I meet are less expensive than your average private school, like significantly less expensive than your average private school, because it's
Mm,
a teacher out of their home, right?
right.
Their overhead is significantly less. That's part of why they don't get why they aren't becoming a full-on private school. The cost of becoming a private school is in most states is very, very high. It costs thousands of dollars just to go through the process. And it's cost prohibitive for the school itself. And that's where you get the tuition going up and up and up, right? You have all these overhead
Right.
costs. So you're talking about a a person in their house, or sometimes it's a lot of times they're in a church. A lot of the micro school owners that I talk to, they're running out of a church because the church doesn't use their like Sunday school rooms during the week, right? They have an agreement.
Oh,
They're not religious, but they just have this agreement with the church. And
fascinating.
so I would
Yep.
not write off a micro school because of price. You just don't know. So those would be the things that I would say about a micro school and price wise. You just really don't know.
It's just so
Mhm.
interesting that this concept is a solutions for so many things, right? Not only kids, but teachers who are burnt the fuck out. There's so much stress and responsibility and work that this is also an option for them
Yes.
potentially to either make the same amount or more by having less students, less stress, more flexibility in their own life. Could you speak a little bit to that? Just you being a
Yeah.
teacher in all these different settings, what are the pros and cons that you've seen?
Yeah. I mean, so as a teacher, it's a scary move to make. It's a scary move as a parent. So I have my
Yeah.
first kid this school year. So the other students that I have all came from homeschooling. They were
Oh,
public school kids who were just like my son. They were public school kids who really struggled. Their parents started homeschooling them out of necessity. They didn't want to be homeschoolers, but they did it. And then they found me and they were like, thank God, another option. This
mm,
year I had my first kid come straight from the public school to me, which is a huge, huge jump because
yeah.
it's scary to have never homeschooled, to leave kind of the quote unquote protection of the public school to something that's entirely not regulated. It's a huge leap of trust.
Right.
But that's how bad the public schools have gotten that people are willing to make that leap.
Mhm.
It's also a huge scary leap for a teacher to do that, right? You don't have the stability of, like a guaranteed paycheck and all the benefits that come with being an employee of the public school.
Right.
Um, one of the things that you and I had talked about was that what happened in my state is that they stopped having special ed be a certified area. So I would have had to go back and get my master's to be a certified teacher because my degree is in special ed and they don't count that anymore. I needed to have a degree in like English or something else to be counted as a teacher still.
Even though how long had you been doing that job, Jen?
Over 10 years.
Yeah, great,
Right.
cool.
And so I was like, okay, but who's going to pay for grad school? And
Yeah.
they were like, nobody. And I was like, how much of a pay raise am I going to get for getting my master's? None. And I was like,
Oh my
what the
god.
hell? And I'm like, and I'm a single mom. So how in the world is this going to happen? Like, who's going to and nothing. So, right. So for me, that whole idea of like job stability, like wasn't really there. So my only option really was to work in charter schools, which was really complicated anyway. So
So, like, yeah, you took the route that is supposed to be the quote unquote secure route,
super
and that
secure route.
that got all fucked up. So it's
Right.
like, okay, might as
Exactly.
well.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so I do throw that out there. Like, but it is scary for teachers to make that jump. But when you're burnt out to the point where it's impacting your health, which for me it was, and for a lot of teachers it is,
Yeah.
um, it's time to make a change. And if you can take the risk and make the jump, do it. One of the things that I did was I just listened. I think it was 6 months of listening, maybe even a year of listening to podcasts. There's one fantastic journalist, Carrie McDonald. She's now become a friend of mine who has a podcast, and she just interviews micro school owners one after the other after the other. I think she's now up to 2 a week. There's that many micro school owners now.
Wow.
Yeah, and she's been
Unbelievable.
doing it for a few years. I was lucky to be a guest on her podcast in the beginning, which was fantastic. And I just that's what gave me the courage to do it, because one after the other they're not only successful, but they have wait lists. Like, they open and then they have a wait list. They open and then they have a wait list. And that's when I was like, okay, I it you know, yes, it's a risk, but it's worth it. And now I'm happier than I've ever been. I have hard days, yes, but they're hard days for the right reasons. They're hard days because a kid really struggled today because he's had so much trauma at his last school, and I still haven't figured out how to get him invested in this school. And he's
Mhm.
like pushing all the buttons and trying to break all the rules and whatever. That's the right reason to have a bad day. It's not a bad day because my administrator is giving me more paperwork and he doesn't seem to understand that I don't have enough time for the paperwork and blah, 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 blah. Like not
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. It's a bad day because I don't even call that a bad day. That's like a day where I'm still trying to figure out a kid. And that's like, that's what my brain is best at. That's like I'm still thinking about it when I go to bed, but it's not stress thinking. It's like I don't know, my genius zone thinking, you know?
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
I have parents, the poor parents that bring their kids to my school, especially when they first start here, they're terrified. Every time they talk to me, they think I'm kicking them out of the school. Literally, every time I text them, I'm like, okay, so and so had a hard day. And they're like, are you kicking us out? And I'm like, no, I'm not kicking you out. I promise. The poor parents are like, I'm so sorry you had a hard day. Like, how do you do it? And I'm like, I live for this. Like, yeah, your
Yeah.
kid had a bad day. This is what I'm really good at. Like, I know we're going to have a good day at some point. I don't know when it is, but we're going to have a good day. Right.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know what it would take for a teacher to jump straight from school, like a, cu- a cushy, which they're terrible,
Yeah.
but a cushy, like public
Right.
school job or even a private school. The private schools aren't that much better. You get paid a lot less at private school. To what I do now. Maybe it's the money. I do make more money than I did then.
Yeah.
But I'm happier than I've ever been. I'm healthier. I sleep more. Oh, well, it's not really true, but I only have kids 4 hours a day. I do work more than
Mm.
that though. I
Mhm.
only have kids 4 hours a day, 4 days a week. Wednesdays I take off from kids. I do a lot of business stuff
Right.
on those days, you know.
Right.
It's literally a dream come true, and that's what I tell people, and that's not a that's not like a tagline or something I say to be cute. It's like really what I was meant to be doing, and
Yeah.
I'm actually saving kids' lives. Like I'm clear that my kid wouldn't have made it otherwise.
Well, it's almost like what you described for your own turning point is that it was just things just fell apart so much there was really no other option, right? And that might
Yeah,
be somebody else's kind of turning point is that we've tried everything else. This is kind of the
yeah,
rock bottom of the situation. We might as well give this a try. But
yeah,
hopefully, as this becomes more normalized, people won't have to get to that breaking point either as an educator or a parent or a kid or whatever, that it will just be one of the options instead of last resort, maybe for some people. And I think talking about it, and obviously podcasts like the one that you mentioned, where it's so normalized, you're hearing Microschool owners every week and stuff is a step in the right direction. I'm just kind of excited that in so many ways we're kind of going back to these kind of more, I don't know, kind of smaller communal
yeah.
ways of living. I'm so curious to know what the clear differences you've noticed, just so parents or whoever's tuning in can kind of get those kind of daily examples of the difference that this can make, in the right kid.
So I have a kid that's been with me the longest, other than my kid, obviously. But
Yeah.
Um, when he came to me, he had been in the public school for first grade, and it was school was just overwhelming for him. Like too many kids, and it was terrifying for him. And he became like rigid and just difficult, like just no to everything. Like if you said, do you want ice cream, he would have said no in the beginning. And so when he started here, he wouldn't even come in the door. He had long hair and he would keep his hair in front of his face so I wouldn't see his face, and he wouldn't even tell me his name. I mean, obviously I knew his name, but he gave
Yeah.
me like a made up name, and he wouldn't let me call him by his real name. And his
Mm.
mom would bring him and leave him in the car, and she would come in, and he would like eventually maybe make it in the door. And when it came to actual school, before she pulled him out of school, it was a truancy issue. Like she couldn't get him to go to school. And we're talking about 6 years old, right? We're talking
Whoa.
babies, babies. He was so
Wow.
terrified of school. It was a mental health issue. And she is a mental health care provider. So she knew, she was like, I'm not going to force my kid
Yeah.
to sacrifice his mental health. So she pulled him out of school, homeschooled him for a little while, and eventually she was like, this kid needs some socialization. He needs something. So she sent him here. Then he was here for about I don't know, 4 months or so. Totally different kid. He's participating. He doesn't love everything. He still says no to me quite a bit, but he's still participating. He got his hair cut. He cut short. He lets me call him by his first name.
Yeah.
He participates in most things, right? And I was talking to the parents at parent teacher conferences at the end of the school year last year. Well, it's kind of the middle of the year, I guess. And I was looking at the summer and I had nothing planned for the summer. And I said, "Do you guys want anything during the summer?" And they were like, "Well, yeah, that would be great." I said, "I was thinking, why don't we just continue through the summer with our regular schedule?" And the parents were like, "We would love that," because finding summer camps is like the worst thing ever for parents. Parents, they
Mhm.
hate doing that. And I said, "Yeah. And I
Mhm.
think for these kids, it'd be great to have the, normal schedule."
Right.
So anyway, I was like, "Oh no, the kids are gonna be so mad at me that I just like set up school for
Yeah.
all summer long." Like I would be
Right.
so pissed if my teacher told me that we're gonna have school all summer.
Yeah.
So the next day I announced to all the kids that we were gonna have school all summer long. And this kid starts screaming and he's like, "Yes, yes, we're gonna have school all summer long. Yeah."
Oh
And he was
my
so
gosh.
excited. So then the day after that, and you can find this if you go on my Instagram, the day after that, I accidentally was recording during our circle time on
Yeah.
my cell phone. I take pictures and stuff like that. And I accidentally recorded it. And he was like, "This name of our school is Fáilte, Waldorf Microschool." And Fáilte in Gaelic, my family's very Irish. Fáilte in Gaelic means welcome. And that's what I want them all to feel, is like that warm Irish welcome that
Love
we
it.
have in our Irish family get togethers.
As somebody
And
named
so
Delanie, I highly approve this message.
yes, yes. And so I had asked them what they did the day before. And at the time, we didn't have school on Fridays. They had 3-day weekend. And I was like, "How was your weekend?" And he said, "Oh, it was so awful. It was so boring. I had nothing to do. Why don't we have school on Fridays? When are we going to have school on Fridays?" And he goes on and on. And he's like,
Wow.
"Isn't it so funny that when kids go to other schools, they don't want to go to school, but when kids come to Falcha, they want to go to school? Isn't that such a weird thing?" And he goes on and on and on. Yeah,
Oh my gosh. I bet you wanted to, like, burst into tears at that
I
moment,
did. I
Jen.
was holding the tears back. I still get
Oh,
like chills when I talk about it because I love that kid so much and I love all of them so much. But that's what happens at this school.
yeah,
And a
yeah.
matter of months from school refusal
Unbelievable.
to,
Unbelievable. I mean,
"Why
that
can't we have more school?"
yeah, and, like,
Yeah.
that's what learning and community and making friends should feel like. It shouldn't feel
Yeah.
like this terrible place. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
What kind of things do you do differently at Falcha than maybe a conventional school? Is it the way that you schedule the day? Is it the type of activities that you do? Like, how does it work for somebody who might be interested? And of course, every school is different, I'd imagine,
Hmm.
but what are you doing?
So it's all of the things that you just said. Probably
Okay.
it's all of it. So, first of all, we're small, so we only have 4 kids. They're all boys, which that is not on purpose. That is a testament to our public school system. It does not serve
Interesting.
boys. I think
Interesting.
I've only ever had one girl interested in our school.
Could could you actually talk about a little bit about that? Why you think that is? Because that is super interesting to learn.
Yeah, I think boys just want to move their bodies, and I think boys need to move their bodies more. And when they try to move their bodies, school is so rigid with sit. I was actually talking to my dad, and I was talking to one of the other parents who was talking about her experience growing up. And I was talking to my dad because I was like, I wouldn't say that like education back when he went to school was better per se than the
Mhm.
schooling that they get now. But what was it that was different? And he was like, "Well, we walked to school every day and it was like a mile away or more. We walked and then we walked home for lunch and then we walked back and then we had recess for an hour, and then we had a little bit of time for school, and then we had recess for another hour, and then we
Wow.
walked home." And he was like, "So, yeah, we had to sit there and they would hit them with ruler." Like he went to Catholic school, so they
Yeah.
hit them with rulers and stuff like that. But like they spent so much time moving their bodies that like, the short amount of time that they did have to sit still And then at the end of the day, like school was over. It wasn't, they didn't have a ton of homework. They didn't, all that kind of stuff. But nowadays it's sitting. And then when you get in trouble, which boys often do get in trouble more than girls, having been in school, having been a teacher, that is much more common than that boys are getting in trouble more than girls. What do? Is they take away recess. That's what happens. When boys misbehave, they get recess taken away or
Mm,
gym class taken away, right? So then they
mm,
can't move their body, which is what they need. They need to move their body. And it's not just that they want to, it's like they physically need that. And so, yeah, that's what I think it is. I think it's that boys just aren't served. Girls need it too. All kids, all
mhm.
children need that. But I
Right.
think there's just a stronger need in their physical makeup.
So interesting. So how do you set up your day or the activities and all that?
Yeah, they have access to going outside at all times. We have a main room and then there's a sunroom. So there's like a whole wall of glass windows that I can see out of. And then there's a sunroom and then there's a big fenced in backyard. So I can see the whole thing at all times. So they have access to all three spaces at all times. And then so we start the day off with our lessons because everyone's kind of there at their best first thing in the morning. They're kind of rested, they're a little bit lower energy. So we do our lessons first thing in the morning. And like we said a little bit ago, when you homeschool kids or when you're working with kids one on one, your lessons are a lot shorter because you can answer a kid's question right away and deal with any misconceptions or difficulties immediately. They don't have to wait and raise their hand. You don't have to deal with a bunch of different things.
Right.
it's I was shocked when I first started homeschooling my son. Like, it's so fast.
I
Astounding.
Yeah, I actually graduated high school 3 or 4 months early because it was just me, myself,
Yeah,
and I'm teaching myself stuff, and asking questions with one teacher and
yeah.
going at my own pace. I basically was able to get a full-time job at, like, 16 or 17, 2, 3
Crazy how
hours a day.
fast you
But
can go.
yeah, it's wild, yeah.
Yeah, so their lessons are very short. I teach each kid, each grade individually. My son and one other kid are in the same grade. So I have a second grader, two third graders, and a fifth grader. So I teach each of them separately. The other ones play whatever they want while I'm doing that. Um, but what is different? So there's lots of playtime.
Okay.
The thing that makes it different is that I don't force anyone to do anything. So the expectation is that they come and see what we're going to do, like whatever the lesson is, whatever the activity is. If they decide they're not going to do it, then the expectation is that they go and do something by themselves, whatever it is. Like they could go, we have a lot of sensory things here. So we have chairs that spin and we have things they can jump on and we have yoga balls they can sit on and whatever. We have a lot of different options.
Yeah.
We have like sensory sand they can play with and blocks they can build with, like all kinds of things. But
Yeah.
so I'm never going to force them. And if they don't do their lesson today, they didn't do their lesson today. I'm not going to say, oh, now you lost playtime, or I'm going to tell your mom, or whatever. The most important thing for me is that they feel safe, that they feel respected and honored, and that they build positive relationships with their peers. And so um, that's what we focus on is their mental health. The academics will come. Children and human beings in general, we are curious people. All the research shows that we want to learn. And so if you don't force somebody, and these kids have been forced enough, if you don't force someone and you just give them time, eventually they will come and they will want to learn. And so I had a kid who didn't want to do lessons, and they usually don't. They usually take full advantage of that when they first start. They're like,
I
"Oh,
was
you're not
gonna
going to make
say,
me?
how do
Okay,
you
great."
what's the balance there, I bet.
Yeah. But then they can't go play with all the other kids because that's when it becomes too much of a free for all. But they
Right.
can go do something else. But then they'll usually go do something else within earshot and they'll listen to me go through their lesson and then they'll start giving the answers from far away. But they're
How
like, but I'm not
funny.
doing it. And I'm like, okay, I know you're not doing it, but I just thought I'd tell you what I was going to do with you. And then
Yeah.
they'll give me more answers, right? And so over time, eventually they're doing the lesson because
Wow.
they can't help themselves, right? They're interested.
And
And
they also probably wanna be with, like, their other classmates too. It's like, well, if
yeah,
I can play by myself or I can go join the team over here who's doing the
right.
lesson. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Interesting.
so that not forcing part and not having punitive consequences, we don't have punitive consequences for anything. There's only like natural consequences. So like if you go ahead and like, destroy somebody's building or something that somebody did, like we got to sit down and talk about it because now that person is not going to trust you every time you come by. They're going to think you're going to knock their thing down. But I'm not going to say like, "Oh, go sit in timeout." Like we sit down and we talk about things, or maybe you now have to be the one who cleans up all the blocks because you knocked them all down, or whatever it
Right.
is. Right? We don't I treat them with respect and like people, like human beings, because shockingly they're human
Right.
beings and people,
Right.
right? As odd as
Right.
that sounds.
And I'm sure
Yeah.
that makes them feel like an adult in a way, in a good way,
Yeah.
where they feel like they're part of the conversation, their feelings and thoughts matter, their
Hmm.
agency matters. Wow, this is so, so fascinating.
Then the other thing is that we follow a Waldorf curriculum, which is a developmentally appropriate based curriculum, which means that like we don't start reading in kindergarten. We'll start introducing letters in first grade. If a kid is reading in kindergarten, that's fantastic. Great. Their
Yeah.
brain just so happened to be ready. But we're not going to force things early. That's been proven to not be, by neuroscience, has been proven to not be good for their brains. Our brains are just not ready for it. When kids are in kindergarten, their bodies should be learning all about their sensory system. So they should
Mm,
be like tumbling and spinning and like crashing into things. That's what they should be doing. And they should be learning social interactions, like how to recognize feelings on someone's face, or those kinds of things. And so when we start to force them to learn letters and do those kinds of things, what happens in the brain is we're starting to use the language center of their brain, which is a different center that they're not really quite supposed to use. Now, I'm using very general terms. There are some children who will naturally pick up reading at a very young age. I'm not saying like discourage that or it shouldn't
right.
happen. That's
Right.
just natural for some kids. But some children, including my son, were forcing, like at that school, he was being forced way too early. He just wasn't ready. And then we're telling them they're like wrong, or we're telling the parents, like, oh, your kid's behind in reading, right? And they're labeled that from the beginning, and they just weren't ready. And
Yeah.
then what happens is you're starting to have the brain focus on building that area when it's supposed to be building the sensory system. And then we start to wonder why later in life those kids show signs of things like ADHD, which are, that like they have all these sensory needs. And it's like, well, they didn't really get to fully develop their sensory system. So what,
Wow.
I wonder why, like we're forcing these things earlier in life and not letting them go play in the mud. We do a lot of playing in the mud. That's another thing we do, a lot of playing in the
Your
mud.
school sounds like the shit. They're gonna get a lot of signups, I feel like. You're gonna get a big wait list after this episode for sure. Is there anything that you wish you would have known early on, whether it's around the logistics of setting up your own micro school or just as a parent with this transition into, getting your kid into an alternative school situation? What would have made it a little bit easier for you or a smoother ride if you would have known as soon as possible?
There was something about pulling my kid out of the school system. Even he was in a private school, so he wasn't even in the public school, but the idea of taking him out of that like protected system that everybody sends their kid to
Yeah.
seemed so scary. It's really easy. Like just you can just take your kid out, and if it doesn't work, just pop your kid back in. It's
Yeah.
really like just take them out and put them back in. It's really easy, and people do it all the time for less important reasons than the one you're like overthinking. I mean, people take their kid out and put their kid back in for really terrible reasons, right? Like because
Right.
they're trying to avoid accountability for something they did or whatever. Like so if you're overthinking something and you just are like, I don't know if I should do this, if I think that if back when he was first being bullied, I first was like, oh, his mental health is being impacted. If I had known someone who homeschooled and I had seen like how good and how happy their kids were, I would have taken that step a lot earlier.
Mhm.
Um, and I just didn't know anybody. Like I didn't know any of this. I didn't know this was a world that I could be a part of.
Yeah.
And so if I had known that, I think um, I would have saved him a lot of heartache. There are still things that we are dealing with today that are because of things that happened back then. And I can't change that. That's part of his story. And we all have things that are part of our story, right? And that's okay. That just makes him part of who he is. But sure, as a mom, I wish I had done something earlier, right?
Sure.
And so that's what I would say. I would say homeschooling, some kind of innovative education, alternative education, doesn't have to be this scary thing just because everybody you know has done public or private school. It doesn't have to be some extreme option. It's not anymore. It's not an extreme option. There's millions of kids in hybrid or micro schools nowadays. Yeah.
Absolutely. And obviously, you've talked about the difference that you see in the kids' mental and emotional well-being. I mean, probably academic performance,
Hmm.
wanting to learn, being excited about, coming together with their classmates and learning new things. You've also talked about how this has really changed your life, your day to day. Has it given you a new perspective on anything that you didn't have before? And have you been applying that kind of new perspective to other areas of your life? Are there any other changes that you've noticed for yourself in this experience?
I tend to be on the more liberal side of things.
Mm.
And my microschooling, and we're talking about the world of school choice and those like education savings accounts, ESAs I was talking about, and those tax programs, those
Mhm.
fall under school choice, which is a Republican issue. The Republicans tend to be the ones who want school choice, want parents to be able to choose their schools. And it's really been interesting because I meet more micro school owners, and a lot of them tend to be a very diverse crowd, like
Yeah,
owned by people of very diverse backgrounds and, of, in my opinion, more liberal backgrounds. I don't actually know what their like political backgrounds are.
sure.
There are some much more what I would consider very conservative people, but there are some very liberal people. And yet we are doing something that is in this world of school choice. And school choice is a Republican issue. And so
Huh.
it's been a very interesting thing because I wouldn't say there's anything else in my life that I do that is across the aisle or in the middle. That has caused me to like stop and listen and read a lot more before I say something.
Oh,
Um
interesting.
like I said, I go to a lot of conferences. I've been asked to speak on a lot of different a few different podcasts, and now I write for like a newsletter that goes out to some people, and I have people come visit my school. Like we're getting a lot more notoriety, and these organizations are funded by different political groups, and so there's like a lot of things at play that I don't really have a lot of understanding about. And so it's having me take some pause and go, okay, let me like learn more instead of
Mm.
being just like opinionated one way, right?
Yeah.
Because I believe that this movement and what it's providing for my kid and for these children is the way of the future and the way that education should be.
Mm.
And it happens to be the opinion of people that are across the aisle from what I usually believe. And so,
Wow. What a lesson for all of us to kind of take to heart, right? That
yeah.
the nuance. I'm a big believer that we all have more in common than we do
Hmm.
differences. Thank you for sharing that. I think that gives all of us kind of something to munch on here.
Yeah, that was a good question. I haven't thought about it that way. But yeah, that was a great question. You're good
That
at this.
Hey, thanks, Ben. Where can people find more about you and your school, and maybe some resources that also helped you in the beginning of this process, or still continue to help you?
Yeah. So, waldorfmicroschool.com is the best place to find everything out about us. You can find our social media stuff on there. We are at Waldorf Microschool is where we are for Instagram. Also, that's where you get like the most updates on what we're doing. We're also on Facebook. I am doing work to kind of bring together micro school owners in Pennsylvania. I'm not doing it at a national level, but if you're in Pennsylvania, definitely reach out to me. Yeah, so those are the places to look for us. You can also message me through my website, which I'd love to hear from people and what you're up to, what you're interested in. And I'm happy to connect people with the right people in their area because, like I said, this is a movement I'm really passionate about. And then your other question was resources. So, um, really, if you search microschools in your area, things will pop up. If you follow me on Instagram, I share every Monday. I share microschools in the media, and I share some kind of whether it's a um, an article that I found or some kind of something in the news about micro schools that are popping up and how successful they are somewhere across the country. So you might see something in there. Um, and then I think some of the most like I said, the most influential things have been the work by Carrie McDonald. She's just really fantastic. She wrote a book called Unschooled. And that book is really about what is education separate from schooling. So we have the two mixed together in our country that like school is the same as being educated. And she really kind of dissects the two in that book. And that has really changed the way that I look at education. And so I highly recommend that book for people. And it's also, there's an audiobook. So if you don't have the time to read it, you can listen to it.
Incredible.
And she has a podcast if you're interested in the Liberated podcast. And so if you're interested in listening to the stories of other microschool owners.
Incredible. And also, like, as adults, how about we also apply this to our own lives too? Like all these things that are good for kids and their development and their happiness, right? Like, oh, how can we infuse that into our day-to-day too? So Jen, thank you so much. You're just a wealth of information. I'm so excited for you. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I hope this episode gave you some ideas or inspiration, whether it's for you, your child. Feel free to share this episode with other people you know who may find this information helpful. And yeah, these micro schools just sound so awesome. And the variety of them that exist is incredible. I really had no idea there were so many fun niches out there. All right, everybody, I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I'll talk to you soon. So glad you tuned into Self-Helpless. If you felt supported by this or past episodes, there are a couple ways you can help the show. Feel free to share it with a friend who may enjoy the variety of discussions we have here. Also, you can become a monthly or annual supporter of the podcast on Patreon at patreon.com/selfhelpless. That's where you can pitch and vote on topics, submit questions for special guests, or be a silent supporter and not participate in any of that. 100% of Patreon and merch proceeds go directly to operating expenses that not only keep the show going through thick and thin, but also keeps it accessible to all with minimal ads. If you want to show a little extra lovin', you can leave an Apple Podcast review or send an email to share how Self-Helpless has impacted you. All of this info and more goodies can be found at selfhelplesspodcast.com. All right, love you big time, and thank you so much.